on the future aid to the Taliban that Jake Sullivan was talking about this morning.
Yeah.
He said when it comes to economic and development assistance with the relationship with the Taliban, it'll be about the Taliban's actions. Should we understand that to mean that economic and development assistance could translate to taxpayer money eventually going to the Taliban at some point? I know it's different from the humanitarian aid we've been talking about, the World Food Program and things like that, but these specific references that Sullivan made this morning.
Well, I would go back to kind of the earlier question on this. There's an enormous amount of money they have at in the Federal Reserve. I shouldn't say they. The government of Afghanistan has in the Federal Reserve, which they don't have access to right now. That's actually their money that's being held there. So that's one of the questions here. There are also sanctions that are in place on a number of leaders. Obviously, that prevents them from doing business in various parts of the world. I think that's really what Jake Sullivan was referring to.
But to get back real quick to this issue of leverage, and I understand the U.S. plans to use that leverage for safe passage, but what specifically does the U.S. also want to see from the Taliban that they would use that leverage to get? You mentioned human rights or women's rights. Will the U.S. use its leverage if, for example, the Taliban doesn't allow girls to go to school or appears to be violating basic women's rights?
I think the president said that in his speech.
Okay. So things like access to the global marketplace would be contingent on girls being able to go to school, fundamental women's rights.
I'm not here to outline specific parameters for you, but what I can tell you broadly is that human rights, women's rights are certainly what the United States and also the global community will be looking at.
And I know the president also said in his speech that that assumption about how long the Afghan government would hold on, how long the military would be able to hold on, he acknowledged that that was a failed assumption. Who is responsible for that assumption? Is the president frustrated with his team at all for having made that false assumption?
We don't have the luxury of being frustrated. Our focus right now is on continuing to move forward on our diplomatic efforts and continuing to do everything we can to get our Afghan partners and American citizens out and to get Afghans who have fought by our side safely settled in the United States and third countries around the world. Go ahead.
Was that like a military assumption, though, or was that an assumption coming
I
from
don't
the
think
intelligence
anyone
community?
assessed that they would collapse as quickly as they did. Anyone in this room, anyone in the region, anyone anywhere in the world. If you have anyone who did, I'd be surprised. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen.